gallery. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Sorry, I'm coming from teaching 2 classes back and back, so bear with me. I would try to be as cohesive and clear as possible. So maybe I could start a bit with the background of the exhibition. The exhibition was an invitation by Tamara. We've been having conversations in terms of which pieces she was interested in having in the show. Some of the pieces are from my first exhibition back in 2014 at Teoretica. This exhibition was sort of like a revision of the book, or this sort of book that it's part of the educational system in Costa Rica, which is Cocori. Um, the exhibition was at Teoretica in Costa Rica. The name of the exhibition was ¿Y qué fue Cocori? My idea behind this exhibition was kind of like position myself as an artist in terms of the region and how the region represented Black people or Black Costa Rican through the history of, let's say, books, or the history or fiction or myth of the Black person in Costa Rica. For this exhibition, we decided to bring some of those pieces, and also we added some new pieces that I created last year and this year. And my way to see the exhibition is sort of my position as a Black person, a Latin American person, Central American person who come from the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica, and how I navigate this idea of Blackness in North America. I think it's important to establish that I consider myself a Costa Rican born and raised. I have a nomadic practice in the sense that I believe that my practice is sort of nourished from this idea of movement, the idea of how not only as a Black person, a Black artist, I had to somehow travel or move out of Costa Rica to survive in terms of sustaining myself as an artist. Uh, Also, I like to believe that my practice is embedded in this idea that I like the location of the place to somehow determine the narration or the history behind the exhibition that I'm presenting. In this case, for Demystifying Blackness, I think one of the centerpieces that I'm using in this exhibition is a video, sort of like a video work that I did back in 2015, if I'm not mistaken. I'm gonna play it so you all can see what I'm talking about it. And the name of that piece is Daguerreotipo. So for those who are familiar with photography, daguerreotype or daguerreotipo, let's say, is one of the first oh, let's say is the first mechanical way to capture a picture, right? So is the beginning of the history of photography. Part of the issue with the daguerreotype was that to be able to obtain an image, the person have to sort of sustain the pose for a long period of time, and that eventually would create an image. For my video, I'm using a reference which is one of the first images of enslaved people in North America, and I'm using this image as a reference to talk about the idea of image production, and at the same time, the idea of how images are diasporic, right? So I'm gonna play this video so y'all could get an idea what I'm talking about. Share, and let's do it this way. Let's see. Can you all see the video?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. So part of I think this video helps understand the way at least the pieces work in the exhibition. First of all, I think the work shouldn't be considered as individual pieces or individual art. I think more about it as a installation. Each piece have a logic in terms that I believe that they're each one of them in conversation with other pieces, or the this each piece sort of helps understand the narrative of other pieces. For this video, my intention was to kind of play with this notion of how we create images and how it's easy to create history, right? I constantly keep saying that there is a formula to create history if you understand colonialism or colonialism and coloniality. Two different terms there. I always get it wrong in English, but if you understand that part of the idea of creating history have to do with repetition, right? I believe that if you have a myth or you have a fiction, you repeat that fiction way too much, it become a myth. Once you repeat that myth, it becomes somehow like a pseudo reality, and then that reality is repeated so much that it becomes history. So for me, using the idea of these portrait to talk about the production of imagery, and specifically I'm talking about the production of photography, and you can see it here that I'm trying to question the production of photography by inserting in this sort of like stop motion the grid of Photoshop. Back when I was doing this video, 2019, I was interested in questions of identity and at the same time, how easily we can create fake news, right? Or how easily we engage in this idea of believing what we're seeing, and how the production of imagery and the diasporic idea of imagery just navigate that intention. So the installation start with this piece, which could also kind of relate to this other piece that I'm gonna show now. Just a second. Let me see right here. So the second piece that I'm showing is a video that I created last year. The name of the video is No le digas a mi mano derecha lo que hace. No, sorry, this is not No le digas a mi mano derecha. This video is El Milagro de la Pierna Negra. If you're familiar with Christianity and specifically with the idea of saints, El Milagro de la Pierna Negra relates the history or this pseudo fiction of enslaved person that got an enslaved person that they cut off their leg to somehow insert it into a white person, right? So for me, I'm always interested in the idea, not only from the medical perspective, but also from the scientific perspective and the use of Black bodies in terms of how easily it was during colonial time and even today, right, to exploit Black bodies for the interest of science. In this video, I'm kind of bringing into play multiple concepts or ideas. The idea, as I mentioned, of Christianity, how Christianity somehow, if you're related to colonialism and specifically to Central America and Blackness, you can take it out of the way, right? If we think about it, it's through colonialism that we have ideas of cast painting. A lot of my work is inspired in this idea of traveler painters, the idea of cast painting, in the sense that it's through cast painting that we define identities, or somehow we define this sort of hierarchy and how we should engage socially, right? There was a big problem with this idea of cast painting. If you're familiar with it, cast painting have this relationship in which it sort of classified or gave you a notion of what was happening back in the days in the new colonies or New Spain, right? So if you think about cast painting, you have to think about the mixture of different blood or the mixture of let's say, human beings in Central America specifically, or the new colonies. So in terms of cast painting, you have this idea that a white person with an Indian person, or what we call Indian or indigenous person, would be a Creole, right? If we think about the idea of mestizaje, we have to think that the idea of mestizaje have a full intention of whitening, right? To hopefully transform the way people in this region look and hopefully transform the way people thought and people act in this region. For me, this have a lot of value because I do believe that the way in which I produce my work had a lot to do with the idea of embracing these systems and try to utilize these systems in my advantage to create new medium. In this piece, as I mentioned, I'm using the reference of El Milagro de la Pierna Negra, and also I'm using Muybridge. If you're familiar with Muybridge, the creation of video, He was the first person that kind of like started out the started out the mechanization or moving images, right? So I'm using a reference of his Walking Man piece, and for me, it's sort of have a lot of relationship, not only in the sense that it was through Muybridge investigation that we figure out a lot about how we paint or how we engage the movement into movement, right? Or how things move in real time. So to be more specifically, through Muybridge studies, we sort of managed to prove that the way in which horses were painted was not the right way, right? So for me, that have like an historical value that I could bring into my work, in the sense that I find relationship into these ideas of creating new content from historical archival material, and try to provide it some context to real time. I still see the black bodies or black bodies in terms of sports, in terms of entertainment, but still not valid in terms of other, let's say, areas or areas of knowledge. Let's put it that way. So for me, my legs is it's something that I appreciate a lot symbolically, in the sense that my first majors in sports, most of my engagement with art have to do with my body. I have a problem in the sense that I try to only use my body, my image as part of my work, as I believe that the only way in which I could express what I understand as Blackness is through my body. Uh, Previously, I was using other people's images, and I find problem in that, as I was trying to impose my experience into other people, into other bodies, right? So for me, the legs have this notions of sports, strength, have the notion of, you know, how easily we could market the these legs as product. And at the same time, I don't know, it always comes back to Tina Turner, and Tina Turner being one of the first persons that actually managed to kind of how you say it, and I'm trying to find a word in English. She managed to asegurar. Ah, 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 ah. Now my English is coming into play. Not asegurar somehow.
Ensure.
What's
Ensure.
the word I'm looking for? Someone wrote it on the chat. Let's see. She's secure. Thank you. Thank you. She secured her legs, right? And she managed to make profit out of it. So maybe this is the other subject that comes into play in my work, which is currency. I find that, in short, that's the right one. Thank you. I find that most of my work deal with currency, different currency. I see uh, identity as a currency. I see the landscape even as a currency, right? So I always think in terms of informal economies when it comes to my work, in the sense that I believe that most of my practice is engaging in appropriating mediums that are around me, materiality that I am able to access, right? And through the access to this material and archival material or specific material, I'm able to produce something else. And I see this practice embraced somehow in my family, in terms of how they were able to sustain themselves, right, in Costa Rica on the Caribbean side. If you from the Caribbeans or from Central America in general, I believe that there is a notion of being able to survive with what you have. You don't need high technology, or you don't need the new media to be able to produce. You don't need something new to be able to create something new, right? So we are able to just look around us, gather those materials, and produce something new. Specifically, I could explain this through my family, in the sense that my family know how to grow yuca. They know how to make a flour out of this yuca. They know how to make bread out of the yuca, and eventually they're able to sell this bread, and also have bread left for us to nourish ourselves, right? So I like to embrace that idea in my practice. I believe that is through my research, is through my archival practice, that I'm able to create pieces that hopefully they speak to the moment, and hopefully they're related to my person and the, let's say, the landscape I'm navigating. One of the other pieces that are part of this exhibition is so let me show the other version of this, El Milagro de la Pierna Negra. El Milagro de la Pierna Negra was intended initially to be part of a VR exhibition. This was part of Epoch Gallery, and the virtual exhibition, sorry, was shown as part of the PSD Pacific Standard Los Angeles, which is like the biennial of the Getty in Los Angeles. So this is the other, let's say, the second part of the video, which I will show in a second. And again, I'm still embracing Muybridge as part of the video, and at the same time, I'm playing with what I would call somehow subversive messages or subversive imagery, right? By trying to, okay, I think it's playing. Yes, it's playing. So I'm trying to kind of like play still with the idea of William Muybridge, but in this video, I'm trying to create some sort of like discourse, some sort of narrative by when I formed this triple X, and at the same time, I formed the KKKK. So I'm trying to relate this idea or this video of El Milagro de la Pierna Negra, not only with this idea of Christianity, but also with ideas that might be related to ethnopornography and also with the idea of tropical Gothic. So for this exhibition, the videos don't have audio. For the Epoch Gallery exhibition, they had an audio that was related to the landscape. I would be showing mostly videos as part of this presentation. They are other medias that are part of the exhibition. Some of them are print, work on prints, work on paper, and also collage. And there is a silk screen as part of the exhibition as well. I will show you the silk screen at the end. So the other video that is part of this exhibition is the video performance, No le digas a mi mano derecha lo que hace a la izquierda. This video performance, this would be the fourth iteration of the performance. The first time was done as part of the, the first time was done as part of the exhibition Biometography, curated by Jessica Wembley and Chris Christian in Los Angeles. And when I did that performance, my intention when I did the first performance was to somehow find some sort of kind of like magical, how you would say it? Let me think about the word in Spanish. Sort of like a psychomagical ritual for myself, in the sense that I was trying to distance myself from working with the image of La Negrita, which I will show in as part of here. I will just stop right there. So I was trying to distance myself from working with the image of La Negrita. If you're not from Costa Rica, maybe I could provide some context. La Negrita, or La Virgen de los Ángeles, is officially, let's say, the patron of the country. La Negrita was established in El Pueblo de los Pardos, which was the first Black settlement in Costa Rica. The image of La Negrita is a syncretism between African culture and Christianity or Catholic Church. And the whole intention of most of the Black Madonnas that we had all over the world was to syncretize the culture of Black people and try to make them closer to, let's say, Catholic religion, right? So for me, I always kind of have a problematic issue with the image of La Negrita, in the sense that if you talk to Costa Ricans today, they call her La Negrita, which means the little black, but at the same time, through their imaginary and their psyche, they totally whiten the image of La Negrita, right? So they might call her La Negrita, but somehow they think about her as a white person. So what I start doing in terms of this play with the syncretism of La Negrita I syncretize the image once again, right? I using, as I mentioned earlier, I'm using colonial system to produce work. So what I'm doing is a syncretism between La Negrita and Cocori. As I mentioned earlier, Cocori is a textbook that is part of the educational system in Costa Rica. Is a book that is charged with a lot of stereotypes. It's a book that I had to read when I was a kid. I find myself really conflicted when I read it. And the sad part of it is that most Costa Rican think that this is the reality of Black people in the country. So for me, using the image of Mama Drusila, which is the character that is part of Cocori, is actually Cocori mother. Cocori is the kid on her arms, right? So I'm trying to make this syncretism, and I was actually kind of mocking, trying to make a mockery and trying to make fun of the image, but I think it kind of went in a really, let's say, not bizarre way. I think most people who engage the image might still embrace it because they still have a connection with Kokori that is quite sentimental or nostalgic. So most of the time when they see the image, they think about that nostalgia that they have reading the book and the story behind the book, right? So they sort of not make the connection between the irony that I try to bring in the image. So for me, like engaging in this performance was to try to erase that idea, that attitude, to erase the image, to try to claim back the identity of these characters, right? But I figured out that the piece, the performance, happened to be one of the performances that most curators want me to present, and I continuously, I still do it because I now find a power in it, and I think the power in it, in the performance or the piece or the installation, is that I actually believe that it creates a third place, and having a third place is a very important thing in my work. As I mentioned earlier, from Costa Rica, from the Caribbean coast. I always been kind of like an outsider in my own country. People constantly ask me where I'm from. Even if I'm in Costa Rica, people ask me where I'm from. If I'm in Los Angeles, people ask me where I'm from. If I'm in Toronto, people always ask me where I'm from. So I'm always living in this duality, right? I'm not from here, I'm not from there. I'm always moving from one place to the other. I'm constantly dislocated. So for me, dislocation is a good place to produce. I like to believe in dislocation from multiple perspectives and ideas. If you think in terms of, let's say, pre-Columbian culture, right? We could think of the dislocation in terms of a third place or inframundo, or this place between the real world and the word of the gods, or the word of the dead, right? You have an in-between place. If you think about Christianity, we could think about the in-between place as the limbo. If you think about the in-between place, you could think about it in terms of Black culture as the sinking place or the sunken place, right? If you saw Get Out, the sunken place would be the moment in which he's sitting in the couch and then suddenly they enter into this chant and he just sort of get lost into the black hole. I find beauty in those places. I believe that most of my production is not centered in telling people what's wrong or what's good, and mostly trying to bring imagery that hopefully are creating some sort of discourse or some sort of, let's say, or open up the conversation. I'm not trying to close the conversation, like to say that this is the reality of Blackness. I don't believe there is a uh, one way to think about Blackness. I find problematic that most of the time we think about Blackness centered in North America. Most of the history that we have about Blackness come from the United States, and we're not somehow validating what happened before we have all those movement of blackness in the United States, right? We forgot that Marcus Garvey actually started his movement in Central America, right? And that from those movement that he started out in Central America, eventually we were able to get a Marcus Garvey in North America to start establishing all these ideas of these ideas of Black liberation or the idea of going back to Africa, right? So I always believe that my work is totally centered in the knowledge, in the ideas that I gather in terms of Blackness from Central America and the Caribbean, and then I try to explain or make a relation of those ideas into North America context, as North America is a place in which I live now or work now, and the place in which somehow my work has been promoted and accepted. So I think we're going to have a Q&A. So if anybody, are we ready for that, Cecily, or you still have a couple minutes?
You still have a couple minutes, yeah.
Okay. So I'm just gonna show this video so y'all could get an idea. What I'm gonna fast forward a bit. As I mentioned, this is the third iteration. This was at the Museo de Arte y Diseño Contemporáneo in Costa Rica. To explain again the piece have three stages. The first stage, I draw the image on the wall. The second stage, I have a performance in which I interact with the drawing. I erase the drawing with my left hand. I have my right hand behind my back. I have a whole protocol in terms of how I engage with the image, how I engage with the action, and what would be considered the end of the performance, right? After the performance is over, we edit the performance and then project it over the residue of the erasing of the shot. So I'm just gonna play this, and I'm going to fast forward because it takes like 20 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. We don't have 20 minutes. So I'm going to fast forward and also just try to give you a sense what it looks like. If you want to see the final piece, sorry, you have to go to the gallery. And I must say the image that is part of the gallery is not this one. So it might be more interesting, not saying more interesting, but it's another iteration of the performance. So I would encourage you, if you have access to the gallery, check it out at the gallery. So I'm just gonna play it real fast. So again, my intention with this performance was to kind of create this sort of loop, or what I believe is the creation of history, right? As I repeated, history is created through repetition. So by looping the video, I'm trying to enter in this idea of creating history. And at the same time, I believe that my engagement with the image in the sense that I'm the one who constructed the image, I'm the one who is raising the image. So I'm playing this sort of like God, or this analogy of how we create things, or how things are created in this world, and how things constantly go through the process of erasure, transformation, and then we have something new. So those are the systems that I'm trying to mimic in this performance. And the last thing I'm going to show you is the image of El Blanquimiento de la Sangre. And I think with that, I could sort of close my presentation, and maybe we could enter questions. Just let me get the image, and then I could show you that. I'm just gonna stop sharing here. In the meantime, I think I could answer question while I'm looking for this image. Does anybody have a question?
Feel free to type the questions in the chat if you don't feel comfortable using your mic as well. And I will relay the question to Martin as those roll in.
Thank you, Cecily.
No problem.
Okay, so here's the image.
I have a question. No, actually, I have a comment.
Okay.
Which
So,
I would like to.
Sure.
Okay.
Hello, bro.
Hi, Martin.
¿Cómo estás? ¿Todo bien?
Bien, bien, hombre. Bien, gusto. I really want to amplify something you say that I have been really dealing with it for a long time, and this idea of the Afrocentric, Afro-American centric, and the Black Atlantic idea, this Black British and Afro-Americans colonizing the Afro diaspora, and which is very interesting that you bring that out. And because many times even our own compañeros, they cannot really understand our experience, even though the black slave ships stopped first in Brazil and the Caribbean, and we have a long history before they arrived to the States. So, and the sad part is that they even don't read neither that what have been developed in the Spanish or even in Creole, French, and so I really when you talk about that and when thinking about your work, because that's something else that I want to say. When you talk about the Caribbean, people think of the Caribbean as the islands. That's how, the colonial way of thinking about the Caribbean. So they don't think about Costa Rica as being
Isolated,
the
right?
Caribbean
Because the idea
either.
that keep us isolated as island, right? And that's
Yes,
powerful to isolate people.
yes, yes. So that's what I wanted to bring.
No. Thank you, Raula. I mean, I honestly think that someone sent me something today which was more related to the idea of the Latinx experience. Right now that we're talking about the Latinx, right? I think it's kind of the same. I think that the to embrace the Latinx, I'm fine if I'm included in the discourse of Latinx. That's people who want to include me in the discourse, right? But I personally don't include myself in the Latinx discourse because I don't see myself represented within that discourse, right? And then I think it's the same when it comes to talking about Black history or Black representation in terms of North America. I'm always excluded because somehow I'm not talking about that Black excellence that everybody's talking about, because I'm not talking about those ideas that seems to be the priority in this North American context, and also the priority when it comes to production. So you see a lot of artists who are dealing with the Black subject, but all of them are dealing it with in the same way, right? So I'm not interested in that. I'm actually interested in getting to the roots of where these images are coming from. How can I appropriate those images, and how I can create a discourse that is beyond the idea of Black excellence. I believe that we're past the period of a Black excellence, like is great, but sadly, Obama is not there anymore, right? So we can't keep using the discourse of Black excellence when we don't have Black excellence as part of our government. I heard something like a few years ago, which is, sadly, the power aligned with the power, right? Every power aligned with the government. So if the idea of trying to speak, if we're trying to produce work that speak to the moment, I think we have to leave aside that idea of a Black excellence. We have to be strategic, right? And use the same system that they're using. So as I mentioned earlier, right? My validation right now is my body. It's not that I'm a professor. It's not that I have 2 masters. It's not that I have two degrees in bachelor degrees, that I might have certifications. No, I'm not being valued by that. And I would never be valued by that. I would be questioned before being valued by any one of those ideas. And I think it's the same when it comes to language, right? As you mentioned, most American people don't speak or read Spanish. So all of the history that is written about Blackness in Spanish, in Brazilian, or in Creole would never get access. They would never access it, right? And this is quite an Eurocentric idea, right? And a Eurocentric perspective that most of the readings in art are in English. And that's what we keep validating. So for me, it's important to look back to the region, to go back to Costa Rica, to go back to Central America, to think back in Garifulas, to think back in how the Caribbean was created as a myth, right? How the Caribbean is kind of like embedded in this culture of informal economy, right? That's the Caribbean, right? We know how to survive out of the system. We always creating system around the system to be able to survive. Thank you, Raul. So I'm going to finish with my imagery with this piece, which is the Winding of the Blood. So this is a piece that I created back in 2014, and it was also part of my first exhibition. As I mentioned earlier, this piece embraced the idea of cast painting. Again, I find it important to go back to the idea of traveler painting, cast painting, because I find power in the way those imagery were created and how they function, that even today, even though we're not using those systems, is still engraving the Latin American or the new the colonial countries, right? So for this piece, I embrace medical ideas. I'm embracing the idea of, let's say, cast painting. In the sense of cast painting, let's say I would be considered a tornatras. A tornatras is someone who went back. So let's put it this way: on my father's side, my father is mulatto, my grandmother is white, my grandfather is black, my father is mulatto, and my mother's side, my grandmother is Honduran, Garifuna from the region, and my father is black from Jamaica. So you have, let's say, like an indigenous black, which could be called like a Sambo, Morisco, or something like that, and you have a mulatto. So if you go through the cast painting, mulatto, Morisco, or Sambo give you a tornatras, right? If you think about this is referring to the idea that, you know, you could pay your way out and be considered white, right? You could go through this system and mixing your blood for generations, and eventually you will manage to say that your family is white, right? So for me, I like to play with that, and I create this print which reference the first video that I show you, the daguerreotype video, right? And the way this print function, you go from left to right. The image on the left is mostly semen and just a small percentage of blood. The image on the right have more percentage of blood, less percentage of semen. And I'm trying to create that kind of narrative, right? Of the mixture of the blood and the things that were going on through this cast painting. But I think the beauty of this for me was that when I created this piece, I was trying to insert myself within the discourse of art in specifically Costa Rica. This is a piece that is printed out with organic matter, right? One of the things that I start thinking in terms of my work is I don't conceive my work, most of my work, as work that need to be preserved, right? I think that the idea of art in the jungle always permeate my mind. The idea that somehow we produce painting, we produce prints, and we produce mediums that somehow wasn't intended to be produced in the Caribbean, in the jungle, under the conditions that we live into. So for me, playing with the weather as part of my medium or part of my materiality to create pieces is powerful. So for this piece, they had to close the gallery because the piece somehow, because of the decomposition of the piece, it smelled, right? So the gallery stunk for a couple of days. It smelled like rat, like a dead rat. And I find that quite conceptually beautiful, that somehow this creature, this savage, was inserted in the discourse of this gallery, not only through the smell, but also through this conceptual idea that this is an organic piece that eventually it decomposed and the pores might be spread out through the gallery. So for me, I'm part of the history of Costa Rica. There is no way I would be denied to be part of the history of Costa Rica because my essence, my body is in the ventilation system of that gallery. So I will conclude there, and we still have 15 minutes for some questions. Thank you.